Thank you for coming to another Todd Talk. We take teaching theory and we put it into teaching practice. What we're going to be talking about in today's Todd Talk is how do we take the ceiling off of learning? And so you may have heard this term before, like there's a ceiling on the learning or whatnot. And so what this means basically is that when students are learning something, if there's a ceiling on it, once they get to the point where they have achieved what you've asked them to achieve, there's nowhere else to go. So as a result, they simply stop. When you take that ceiling off, then they get to this point, but they can even take it any further and they can take it as far as they're able to. And this is great for gifted students, especially, but any students, especially, if they want to push their thinking, if they want to, challenge themselves to take it a little bit further, or go a little bit deeper. We always tell students to go deeper. That's how we allow students to go deeper, is by taking the ceiling off and then letting them explore what it is that they're interested in. And so as teachers, sometimes we can put ceilings on learning. We don't intentionally do it, but typically how we put ceilings on learning is that we ask questions that really have no place to go once they're answered. So if you were to ask a question of, what is the color of the sky? And people answer blue, there's not really much more to go with that question. Okay, the color of the sky is blue, boom, done. But other questions that a more non-ceiling question that you can ask is, what do different colors in the sky indicate about weather? And then we're talking about not just blue, but we're talking about shades of blue. So if it's dark blue or light blue, or if it's a little bit of gray or whatever. So all of a sudden students start thinking, okay, when I look up at the sky, what are the different colors I see? It's not just always blue. And what do those mean? And so students could explore that at length on that. And so that just takes the ceiling off of that particular activity and allows kids to explore and to bring in their own experiences and to find the relevance in what they're learning, because it's something that they can see. They can go outside and look at the sky and try to determine what that might mean. Oh, I learned this, and this means it might do this. And so and so this allows them to find something that's going to be relevant for them as well. The major difference between a ceiling and having a ceiling and not having a ceiling has to come down to whether you do convergent thinking or divergent thinking. And so convergent thinking is, there's definitely one answer. There's one way to approach this. There's one way to do this. And you're basically following directions or following a path that has already been blazed by someone else. And as a result, there's not much exploring on this path because the path has been traveled many times. It's tramped down, the pathway is very obvious, may even have, asphalt on it because it's been done so many times. So it's really easy to see the path. Divergent thinking means that there's multiple ways to get there. So one pathway may be the clear path. One may be really a little, have brambles and things in the way. This one over here, you may have to cross a stream. And so, of course, I'm speaking metaphorically here, but when we look at a problem, are there multiple ways to think about it? Are there multiple ways to try to answer said problem? And this is the divergent thinking. An easy way to think about this is the types of questions that we ask that ask kids to do the what, the who, or the where. These are very convergent type questions. Okay, who is this person? Okay, what happened at this date? Okay, where did this take place? Once you answer it, it's done. Okay. The divergent, on the other hand, are asking more questions as to why and how. So you can use a convergent question to start the learning, but you can tear that ceiling off by following up with a divergent question. So for example, if we say, who was the first president of the United States? And your answer, of course, would be George Washington. But if you say, how did George Washington do as a president? Was he successful? Was he not? What are things? And so students then all of a sudden have to start thinking a little bit more, okay? And they have to take the facts and interpret them and evaluate them for themselves. And all of a sudden they're going on a very different pathway. Some students may say, he was not a very good president because of various reasons. Some students may say he was an excellent president because all the precedents that he set. Some students may say it's kind of a mixed bag. Some things he did really well, some things he didn't. And so there's multiple possibilities here. And so we've taken this ceiling and we've taken it off by pushing the convergent question and following it up with a divergent question that allows that ceiling to be taken off. So when we think about ceilings on learning, there are basically 6 C's that you want to think about that where ceilings can be put on things. So for example, one of these is content. When we give students a certain content to learn, are there opportunities for them to take it further and to explore more? So for example, if students are learning about the planets and they're learning, the names of the planets and where they place and everything, those are very much the what type questions, or where, or, and but what if instead with this learning that you push the content a little bit further by saying, asking questions that don't have an answer, like, well, we have our solar system and we know there are other solar systems. Do you think that they have planets? Do you think that there's life on these planets? These are questions like we cannot answer. You can't ask, one of your apps to answer this question for you because we don't know the answer. And so these are great questions to ask because they make students curious and they make them want to learn more. So that's a way you can take content and take it a little bit further. Creativity. When it comes to creativity, I never want to limit my students' creativity to my own. So for example, if I'm asking students to do a certain something and I want them to do it a certain way, they're doing what I've asked them to do at the level of creativity that I'm capable of. Well, I'm very aware that my students are much more creative than me. And so rather than doing that, what if I take off the ceiling and I say to them instead, I want you to show me what you learned in any way that you want to. So you can, you could do a poster, you could do a presentation, you could write a paper, you could do whatever. And then students are able to take their creativity and use it where they feel it's best. So they may be a very skilled writer, so they'll choose writing. They may be very skilled artists, so they'll choose to do a poster. They may be really good at technology, so they'll do something with that. But again, we don't want to limit the creativity of our students by always telling them this is the product you're going to end up with. Instead, we can phrase it as though we want you to master something. What product can you choose to show me what you learned? And so that's how we can take the ceiling off of for creativity. Culture is another one. So we want to make sure that we incorporate all cultures in our classroom. So in all life experiences and all of the things that kids bring to the classroom from their own lives. And so we want to make sure that we are being a little more cognizant of the fact that we're not just reading all the white male authors when we're reading books or whatever, or when we're looking at perspectives. We don't just look when we're looking, say, the Civil War. We're not just looking at the perspective from the white folks, but also the black and brown and the Native Americans and people from overseas and so on and so forth. And so as much as possible, we want to also open up the ceiling when it comes to culture to allow perspectives to be taken into account so that students have a better understanding of what is going on. A fourth C is collaboration. So this is getting students to work together with other people and learning how to do so. A lot of times when we put students in groups, we put a ceiling out by saying, here are your groups. I'm going to assign you groups, and this is how you're going to do it. And then what happens is, those kids work with those kids, whatever, but they're learning how to work with certain kids, but they're maybe not expanding their horizon and who to work with. So what if instead you let them choose who they're going to work with? Or what if, what I do a lot is I do interest-based groups. I'll give students lots of choices of what they can do. And then depending on which ones they choose, those become the groups. It's very organic. So they have people in their group who have the same interest as them. Sometimes I'll do skills inventories and figure out what students feel like they're good at. And then I'll divide them up. So if we're going to do a technology project, then I'll take all the technology people and put one in each group so that we can spread the kind of the knowledge and the wealth that those people bring to that. And so we want to make sure that we're flexible with our grouping. We don't just put high kids with high kids, low kids with low kids, or whatever. we use this flexible grouping, and we know that from each unit to each unit, who the high kids and low kids are may change all the time. It's not just the gifted kids and the special ed kids. It may change. That special ed kid may come in and know a lot about a certain topic that the gifted student doesn't know. And so when we pre-assess, we can do groupings based upon that, and we can take that ceiling off of collaboration. The next one is the idea of communication. So how can students tell us what they know? Does it always have to be the same? So if you have 30 kids in your classroom, do they all have to take the same type of assessment? What if they could explain it better rather than writing it? Could we have them shoot a wee video? Or could they use, create a trailer for a movie that explains what they're... So again, kind of coupling in with the creativity aspect, when we allow kids to communicate what they know in various ways, then we take that ceiling off it, because there are some classes that work really well for kids that are excellent writers, but there are kids that may know that information but just aren't great at writing, and so they can't communicate that properly. So we need to give kids more choices when it comes how they communicate what they know. Do we give them different opportunities? Do we give them, do we give choices for them to think about? The last C is the idea of critical thinking. So if we want students to think, we don't ask what, who, and where questions. We ask why and how questions. So the very questions that we ask in class, from our assignments to our assessments to anything that we're doing in class, activities or anything we're doing in class, we need to make sure that we're having kids do so to whereas they can critically think about something. Again, that there's not one correct answer, that it's a problem that maybe is a little more difficult than coming up with just one correct answer. So we want to make sure that we are taking the ceiling off of the thinking as well by asking the right questions or having the right activities and so on and so forth. Basically, what we want to do is, you've probably heard the term rabbit hole. So this happens to you probably if you go on the internet and you start looking for something, and then you go look for something over here and it sparks something, and you go over here and that seems like you're meandering. But and actually what you're doing is you're using inquiry learning. You're exploring your interest. I'm interested in this. I want to do this. Now I'm going to do this. Now we do this. That's what we want students to do. And by taking the ceiling off, it allows them to explore that. And yes, sometimes they go in a rabbit hole that has nothing to do with what they're supposed to be doing. But we have to let them do that every once in a while, because it allows them to explore it, and then they figure it's a dead end. I hit my ceiling. I'm going to come back and go down another path. But we need to help them to learn how to do that rather than just decide those things for them. So let me give you some examples in different classes of what a ceiling might look like and how you can take that ceiling off. So so let me give you some clues as to what might make a ceiling and a low ceiling, and what may give you an open ceiling. So as I've said before, if there's one answer, if you're asking questions that have a single correct answer, that's a low ceiling. If you're asking questions that have multiple answers, or things that they've never seen before, they're not just reciting, they're having to rationalize and reason, then you're making that ceiling higher, if not taking it off altogether. Kids who are really good and fast, these are your early finishers. That should not happen in your class if you take the ceiling off. When students come up to me and they say, I finished this, Mr. Stanley, I'll say, there really is no finish to it. There's just you just run out of time to do what you need to do. So how could you explore this further? How can you come up with another example here? How could you, explain this in a better way? There's always room to do things if you take the ceiling off of things. Otherwise, when kids finish, they're done, and then they don't have anything to do, and they become bored. So we want to make sure there's a ceiling so kids can explore as far as they want to do that. If you have a low ceiling, there's no need to answer the why. Kids just give you the what. There's no reason to explain it very well. In a high ceiling or no ceiling, the most interesting part of it is the why. Like, okay, we may know the Hammurabi's Code of Law was a code of many laws that were written down by a king in Mesopotamia. But that's not as interesting as why that was important. So that was important because it put all the laws in one place. Because before, when you traveled to one city-state and you broke a law, nothing would happen. But if you broke a law over here, you're going to be beheaded because the laws were different. and the way that they were handled. And so he kind of unified all that, which is what we want. We want fairness. We're all about fairness. And so that why is so much more intriguing than the what. And that's what we should be focusing on. As a teacher, if you're bored when you're doing a task, like you've done a task like 5 times in a row in the same day, and it becomes, oh my goodness, I'm hearing myself again, da 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 da. If you're becoming bored with your own teaching, you probably have a ceiling on things, because they're just hearing this. You're hearing the same thing over and over and over again, rather than like you throw something out there and this class takes it to this place, this class takes it to this place, this class takes it to all sorts of different places. And so these might be indicators that you have either a low ceiling or a ceiling in your classroom, or if you raise that ceiling or you take the ceiling off altogether. So let me give you some concrete examples of what this might look like in a classroom. So let's take a language arts class, for example. We have students read a book. When they come in the next day, a lot of times what we do is we ask content questions about what they read. And the purpose is to make sure that they read what they were supposed to read. So we'll ask about the actions of this character and what they did. We'll ask who was involved with this. We'll ask where did this student go. These are not going to excite students about reading because they're simply reading and regurgitating back what they read. It would be so much more interesting to have a discussion about, like, how did you feel about what this character did? What would have happened if this had taken place instead? How would you have reacted if you were this character? These types of discussion questions, rather than just content questions, are going to show whether the student read it or not. And yet it's going to show it in a much more interesting way. And it's going to make it interesting to them because it's going to make them think about things that they haven't before. And that's where the critical thinking takes place, is that we're having students think about something in a different way. So in a social studies class, if we ask facts, or kids to tell us facts or to give us names, dates, places, all those things, that's very convergent thinking, and it's not, and you definitely have a ceiling on things. And I've even seen like high school students that will take exams that have very lower level questions that are right or wrong here or there. And so what if instead we ask students to evaluate situations? So when we look at something that has happened in history, rather than just reporting about the facts or what we know about it, what if we get the student's opinion on that? Do you think they were right in what they did? So the Boston Tea Party would be an example. The Boston Tea Party, the what is, the colonists threw the tea that came in on the ships overseas because they were upset about taxes. But the really interesting question, the way to take the ceiling off that is, were they justified in what they did? Because some people may say, yes, they were justified. They had no taxation without representation. And yet others may say it was an act of, one man's hero is another man's terrorist. And so it could, but if you're looking from the British perspective, these people were breaking the law and they were destroying property. And so it's a much more interesting way to look at things, and it takes that ceiling off of things. In a math class, what I see a lot is we have math takes place in a silo where you have a question and there's one way to solve it, and you have to show your work, and everyone's work would look the exact same when they turn it in. What if you gave them a math problem that could be solved in multiple ways, like a real life math problem, like determining the value of something or determining which one is the best purchase, or something of that nature? And then students could approach it from different ways. One student may be using this math to try to solve it. Another student might be going this way, and so on and so forth. But that's a way that we can make, because math is usually about one answer, it's about finding a correct answer. Or are there multiple ways to do that? Are there better ways? Can you evaluate what you did once you have done the work? Could you evaluate, was there a better way that you could have done this? So this is going to get students thinking about this, and this is going to take the ceiling off of their learning. When it comes to science, one thing I get frustrated about in science is I see students that do experiments in class, but really what they're doing is they're following a recipe. They're being given very specific steps of what they're to do, and their experiments all turn out the exact same way because they've been following directions. The teacher said, here are the 10 steps, follow them in order. It's like a recipe. You do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. That's not really experimenting. So what if instead we set up science situations where students really did get to experiment? They get to try things differently. So if you say, we want to find out, the hardness of this rock, what are some different ways we could evaluate that? And so some students may rub it on a sheet of paper. Other might scratch it with a fingernail to see how hard it is. Some may look up on the ohms hardness scale or whatever. And so they may go many different directions, but they're experimenting to try to answer this question that may have multiple answers to it. It's more a divergent type question. So when it comes to differentiation, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do, which is trying to meet the needs of our lower students and our higher students, as well as the middle students. And keep in mind, there's change from lesson to lesson, depending upon what students already understand and how quickly they get it, so on and so forth. So rather than making 3 separate tasks for them to do, if you create activities that don't have ceilings and have a low floor where their starting is, they could start down here, they could start here, they could start here, then you don't have to differentiate. You don't have to make the 3 different ones. You make one that has a low floor, high ceiling, and as a result, students who need a basic understanding can start at the low part. Those people who already have that understanding and more can start at the high part. Those kids who are in the middle can start in the middle. This is why I love project-based learning. The way I set up my projects are, I'm usually asking an essential question that doesn't necessarily have a correct answer. There can be many ways to approach that. And so when kids enter into the project, they enter in where their readiness is. So if they have 0 background knowledge on it whatsoever, they're going to be starting at the low floor and trying to figure out the what, the who, what, where, before they start asking that why and how. But eventually they'll get to that point. But if you have a student that already has the who, what, where, then they can start asking the why, how questions immediately, and they can take that and they can keep taking that further and further and up. And so project-based learning is a great way to have a no ceiling in your classroom. It also allows for easier differentiation because it allows the students to take it wherever they're capable of. Now, you as the teacher may have to push them sometimes. Some students may say, I'm done, and you might need to ask a probing question. Well, what have you thought about this? Or have you considered this? So there are different ways to try to push students. So what I want to close with is I want to show you some examples of an easy way. So this is kind of an entrance ticket or a warm-up or whatever that you could use in order to try to get students so that they are starting to think without a ceiling. So let's take this example right here, what you see. So the ceiling question asks students to identify the following shapes. And so students would do that. They would identify the various shapes that are involved there. But what if instead of doing that, you took the same square, rhombus, triangle, and circle, and you had the students draw them, or they could still just identify them, but you ask this follow-up question: which one of these does not belong? And then the student has to think about this. And by the way, there's no one right answer. A student could very easily say, well, the circle doesn't belong because it's the only one without a side. But then someone may say, no, it does have a side. Circles have an inside and an outside. There are sides to a circle. Or they may say that the rhombus does not belong because it's the only one that seems to be kind of turned on its side. There are lots of ways you could go with it. And these type of questions are really good questions to ask students as warm-ups to kind of get them used to the way that those are going to be working. So bottom line, if you want students if you want to take the ceiling off learning and you want students to really critically think about things, you have to make sure that you set this up purposefully, that you give them opportunities to try different things. And one of the easiest ways to do this in the classroom is to give students more choice. So rather than deciding what the assessment is going to look like, asking them to show what they know and choosing that, rather than choosing the content for them. What if, like, instead of choosing the book that they're going to read, what if you gave them a choice in a few books, and maybe any book, as long as it covers the same theme? But student choice is a really good way to take that ceiling off of the learning and to have students so that they are able to take it as far as they're able to take it.